Greetings, everybody. This is Omar James representing the People's Group. You can find us on Facebook. We don't have a website just yet. We're still in the early stages of our development as a organization. But we have a very special guest here today. The Honorable and very respected Mr. Marc Bean, former leader of the opposition and current leader of the Free Democratic Movement. How you doing today, Marc?
Greetings, brother Umar. How are you, my brother?
I'm good, and thank you. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and have a conversation with me. Well, before we get started, just for anyone who isn't aware, can you explain what the Free Democratic Movement is all about?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's a privilege and an honor.
Mm-hmm.
Democratic movement was formed upon Premier David Burt's call for a general election in September 2020. And it was formed based on core principles of the core principles of freedom and liberty. And those core principles of freedom and liberty should be exemplified within governance structures in the form of transparency and accountability and truth and justice and righteousness, most importantly. And so when you apply those principles within the overall context of freedom and liberty, it's something that we find was very much missing in Bermuda society. Now, consequently, 7-8 months later, i.e. today, persons who didn't have a clear understanding of what the aims and objects of the Free Democratic Movement was about and what the principles actually represented, I think now today, as a result of our experiences within Bermuda by this current government, I think that there's a much deeper and greater appreciation of what freedom and liberty is, especially in the absence of the very same principles in our day-to-day lives. Bermuda right now is under an environment led by the current government that has erasing and is erasing freedom and liberty from the citizens of this country. So I think people now can appreciate what the Free Democratic Movement represents, and what we represent is a complete antithesis of what this current government is practicing within the country today.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And well, for some background on how this interview even came about, so there was someone in our group that had posted your interview with the Royal Gazette. This was back in February. It was titled "Bermuda Went Too Far with COVID-19," and I think a funny thing about that article was the first comment on that article was actually talking about how everything was fine and shops were open and everyone's having a good time. But since that time, as you know, this is April, and now we're on a second lockdown, and the government's just imposed some new measures that separates vaccinated people from unvaccinated people. So I think the message that you just the message that you just stated is really resonating with people, and I think,
Yeah,
yeah, like people are really feel that their rights are being infringed upon. So I think,
as they should.
yeah.
As they should. Any right-thinking, self-respecting person, whether male or female, would innately feel when their rights are being trampled upon and when they are not being treated fairly. And it's something that is accentuated in an environment like today, where you have, a so-called public health issue being used as the pretext for removing these fundamental freedoms that we find in our Constitution and every other um, uh, civil society, construct. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, people should feel very, very uncomfortable about it, and they should be prepared to take actions to arrest what appears to be a clear descent and decline into the abyss of social and economic chaos.
Hmm. I feel that. So with the People's Group, the organization that we're trying to get off the ground, our mission statement is that we're dedicated to creating an open and honest and accountable government that serves the public interest. And we want to work towards that because another thing that you had mentioned was that you feel that everyone from the government, the backbenchers, the Fifth Estate, the media, and the voting public were not doing a good job of holding the government accountable. So that's what we want our organization to be about, is holding the government accountable. So, like, do you have any advice for us on how we can
Yes.
best achieve it?
Well, first, I welcome it. And when you hold the government to account, make sure that it's without partiality. So, regardless of which government is in power on the day, it's incumbent when you're in the role of being providing social and political analysis and commentary that you try to present the facts and the truth as you see it, without bias. And so you allow persons to make up their own minds. Unfortunately, today, you find that many institutions have moved away from that integrity. And so I welcome and encourage you to raise or keep the standards very high and avoid some of the pitfalls that mainstream media has slipped into. Now, that slippage by mainstream media, some would say that it might be just laziness. I don't think it's laziness. I think it's something, it's cooperation and coordination on their part with the government of the day, with government house, and with other institutions, in particular international business, because these are the main groups that are advocating the status quo narrative of get vaccinated and basically bow down to the dictates of a group that want their desires to be implemented against the wishes of others. So, you know, that's something that is very concerning. And I think that you all should continue to, hold fast to your integrity and your principles and make sure that you get the truth out to the press, the people of this country, so they know exactly what's going on, so they have the knowledge to make the appropriate decisions.
Mm-hmm. Got you. So, I don't really think of this as like an interview where I'm asking you questions and, you're answering whatever. I want it to be more like just a conversation, right? So,
no problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just want to sort of discuss a couple things with you. So, expanding on to what you just talked about people getting together and holding the government accountable. What do you think about this protest that's being planned for next week? I know everyone tried, or somebody tried to plan a protest a few weeks ago that didn't work out, but this one looks to be gaining a lot of steam. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think, or any
Sure.
opinion on it at all?
Sure, it's something that I encourage.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage persons who are not satisfied with the direction of the country to join with the organizers of the protests and let their voices be heard. Hopefully that will be a catalyst for pressure, so the members of parliament and the leadership of this country will recognize that people are not satisfied, and you should use that as an opportunity to peacefully protest and express yourselves within your constitutional construct. You are free to say what you like, but remember, liberty isn't licensed. But certainly take the opportunity to protest. Absolutely, I think that should be the start of changes that persons must demand in order for their rights to be upheld.
Mm-hmm.
But this current government and this current premier, right, is a master of protest. He actually rode into leadership, right, within the PLP and within the government by carefully calculated protests. One example is the pepper spray incident in December 2nd. Many people would think that the pepper spray incident was something that emanated from either the British government or the One Bermuda Alliance government. That's not true. I'm gonna let everyone know that the pepper spray incident is something that was coordinated and orchestrated none other by your current premier, David Burt. Okay, and so that's an example of the sleight of hand that you will see in play and what you're experiencing right now. What you see is not what you get. You have to be very much aware that that you have leadership that is willing to deceive you by any means necessary in order to accomplish their aims and objectives.
So that's real deep because a lot of us, so a lot of people in my circles, that's what we talk about. I always tell people that with any politician, and David Byrne in particular, you need to don't look at exactly what he does. Try to look forward into the future and think, what does this action that he's performing now, where does he stand to benefit from that? That's what I try to do when I look at whatever David Bart's doing now. So when I look back at things like last year when he said that they expected 700 people to die if we didn't follow the rules and all of that, and immediately I knew that was a tactic, a scare tactic to try to get people to do what he wants them to do. And fast forward a year, we haven't had anywhere near 700 deaths, but we're still in a state of lockdown. We're still having new rules and regulations that people don't agree with, like sort of imposed on us. So, where do you see things going from here with the government's COVID response? And what do you think they stand to gain by that?
Well, I see that the government is going to double down in their efforts to basically oppress the citizens of this country. And it's a good question. Why? Why would you actually want to do something to people that you actually knock on their doors and canvas and ask for their votes? And they actually offer you gingerbread and invite you to their living rooms and invite you to their parties and to their social events. But all of a sudden, you're switched up and you want to somehow put the yoke of oppression on your own people. Why? Well, usually the incentive for politicians and non-politicians to do something against your own self-interest is usually based around financial. It's a financial incentive somehow, some way. Now, I'm not about to go and say that David Burt is benefiting in one way or the other in terms of finances, but the question must be asked, who could he possibly be serving in this regard when the majority of the people of this country are against the lockdown policies, the shutting down of the economy, the destruction of jobs, the increasing of unemployment? Why would you actually do that? Who could you be benefiting? Well, I will tell you that the people that is serving are not Bermudians. Okay, some might be, but David Burt, like the majority of leaders in the world today, are serving a global entity, right? And that's just a fact. Okay, and what is ironic and I think is disappointing but not surprising is that in the case of David Burt and the overseas territories, i.e. Cayman and Anguilla and Turks and Caicos, it appears that the leadership in these overseas territories are going above and beyond their counterparts within the Caribbean and other areas to try and prove to these powers that be that they have the ability and willingness to lock down their own people. You see, I know of one minister of finance who was bragging in another country, not this country, but was bragging in Boston about how he's anticipating that by the time COVID is over, after politics, he'll be able to slide into a nice cushy position in one of these very same international organizations, i.e. the IMF, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the Bank of International Settlements, the OECD, right? So politicians have self-interest, right, at the forefront of their decision makings. And in this case, I find it extremely, extremely disappointing that the overseas territories led by Bermuda are going beyond any other jurisdiction in trying to put their people on lockdown. And so that's something that the people of Bermuda have to recognize, that you have been put into a socially engineered bubble by David Burt. You seem to think that what you're experiencing now in Bermuda is the experience of other people in other jurisdictions. Even the United Kingdom today isn't locked down the way you are being locked down. Okay, so the question is, David Burt, what is the reason for destroying the private sector in Bermuda using COVID as the rationale for doing so? Why would you want to destroy capital? Why would you want to destroy and displace labor? Why would you want to destroy entrepreneurial ideas, and risk taking? Why would you actually want to turn Bermuda on its head and send it back to the dark ages? What motivation could you possibly have? Don't tell me that it's about health, because up until this day, you haven't said one thing positive or instructive to the people of this country in regards to their health and their wellness and their well-being. So it can't be about health. So it must be another motivation. And I say that that motivation is insidious. It's dark and insidious. So let me just sum up this way. Many persons, belatedly, I would say, are now asking, where is the voices to defend the people? Where are the voices to defend the people? Where is the membership of the Free Democratic Movement? There seems to be a void, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I understand that. But first and foremost, now Bermuda is at the crossroads, because instructions and advice has been presented to the people of this country by myself and others for years, and it was rejected. Okay, so now we're finding ourselves at our backs up against the wall. So instead of gloating and saying, I told you so, for the sake of our people and our children and our grandchildren, I'm going to give a simple piece of advice that people can utilize now to act upon, so we can bring the requisite changes that people so desire. And that is this: democratically, you have 36 members of parliament. Premier serves at the will and pleasure of a majority of that 36. That means that 19 members of parliament have the power to change who is the premier. If you have 19 or 20 or 21 or above, regardless of which so-called party they represent, if they no longer have confidence in the direction of this country, then it's their responsibility and obligation to get together, to consult with one another, get the numbers together, and go to Government House. When they go to Government House and they let Her Excellency, the governor, know that they have lost confidence in the leadership of Premier David Burt, then the governor's obligation and responsibility is to then ascertain whether or not these 19 or 20 or 21 persons is actually legitimate. She'll more than likely have a discussion with each person. Each person will have to sign a paper or form indicating their loss of confidence in the premier. And then the next question will be, is there anyone amongst you who can command the authority of a majority in the House that I can then appoint as the premier of Bermuda? Some persons might be asking, well, who could that be? At this point in time, when you're faced with a despotic leader, it's incumbent to focus on removal of that leader and then allowing the democratic process to come to the fore to determine who then can replace that person. Now, that could be a democratic process constitutionally, as I'm speaking, or even subsequently through the delegates conference of the PLP. But because of the handling of this COVID response over the last year, I don't think the responsibility to determine who will be the next leader should rest solely, respectfully, in the hands of the delegates of the Progressive Labor Party. So this is what I will say. Now that you understand that the members of parliament that you voted for and you put into power and you have blessed with a $3,000 to $10,000 a month salary to do God knows what at this point, you need to start holding them to account the same way David Burt is holding you to account on a day-to-day basis in Bermuda by putting you in lockdown. In other words, you have an obligation to call up your member of parliament, knock on their doors, and ask them how soon it's going to take for you to act to remove this man as the premier. Because if you do not act, if you choose not to remove him democratically, then not only will we remember this in the next election, we'll take steps. Okay, you can take steps to force by-elections and ask these persons to remove themselves. See, one thing I do know about my former political colleagues, they are human too. And sometimes they just need a little encouragement, okay? to stand up, right? And a reminder to represent you first. And so encouraging you. If you are tired of governance in the country today, well, you can have a change of government in the next few days. But you have to put pressure on your respective members of parliament, and make their lives just as uncomfortable as your lives are today. What comes along with politics. This isn't Mickey Mouse business. This is a matter of life or death. So if you can ask me, Marc Bean, what is the direction that we need to take? Then the people need to put on the shield and buckler and have the courage of men and women of valor, and stand up for your children and grandchildren, and force these so-called members of parliament who call themselves honorable to represent your interests to the end, and accept nothing less. Because that is your right. Okay? That is your right, and it's their privilege. And that is the message that I want to get across to the people of this country. There are others who are now sounding the same clarion call that something is wrong with our country. And you know what is wrong with our country. We see a dictatorial approach being pushed on the masses, thinking and acting as if the people of this country are simple. While you're only as simple as David Burt thinks you are. Like, if you don't want to be simple, if you want to stand up for your rights, let him know that enough is enough. Let these members of parliament know that enough is enough. Let Her Excellency the Governor know that enough is enough. Let the police commissioner and his command and those on his command know that enough is enough. Let the colonel at the Bermuda Regiment know that enough is enough. Bermuda is too small to be turned into a one-party dictatorial state. And you continue down this path at your peril. I warn you, powers that be, Bermuda is too small. Okay, we all know where everyone lives. It's too small to go along this path of oppressing the people of this country, destroying businesses, creating divide and rule between those who got vaccinated and those who didn't get vaccinated. It's time for us to break off the shackles of oppression. And the oppression, unbelievably, isn't Henry Tucker. It isn't the One Bermuda Alliance. It is not, even though they're complicit. It isn't the United Bermuda Party. Lo and behold, as I think about Dame Lewis Brown Evans and Freddie Wade and Arnold Francis and Walter Robinson, I declare that the Progressive Labor Party today has been hijacked. This is not the Progressive Labor Party of my forefathers. My forefathers, your forefathers are the Progressive Labor Party, are rolling in their graves today. They will never, ever accept such behavior, and you shouldn't either. That's my message to the people of this country.
Marc,
for your rights.
Hey, that was some heat. And that was I give you applause for that, because I couldn't have said it better myself. I couldn't have wrote anything better. No, I'm serious. I mean, what people don't understand is that we have the power to vote them in. We have the power to get them out. Correct. And if enough of you feel that way, then we need to start standing up for ourselves and holding them to account.
Correct. Put them under the same pressure that the people are feeling today.
That's right.
You can't go exercise outside of a mile of your house. You can't go to the beach. Are you joking? But at the same time, you can't even get no work. But these politicians are sitting up comfortably. No, listen, let me tell you something, Omar. In the real world, as they say in Jamaica, now go so, brethren. There's no way that can go down in any other country with right-thinking people. There's no way they can tolerate such behavior. You can't allow some oppressor man, I don't care what color he is. I don't care what he sounds like. You need to stand up and be honorable to your foreparents. Do you know what they sacrificed? They sacrificed everything to allow some joker come along and dictate and destroy the people of this country? Come on, bro. Come on now. Come on now. Hey, listen now. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. So if people want to hear a voice, then that's one of the voices. But the people need to have the courage themselves. They need to show. As soon as you show that courage, we-called so-called leaders are going to flee. Mark my words.
That's right. So before we roll out of here, right? I just wanted to get your opinion on sort of other countries and their response to COVID. Because in the States, for example, where they have a lot of these COVID responses handled at the local level, so each state
Yes.
has its own response.
State. Yes.
You have two states. I'm going to use in this example: Florida and California.
Yes.
California
Yes.
is completely locked down, similar to Bermuda, but I don't think it's as
Yes.
bad, to be honest. And
Yes.
Florida is completely open, and they've been open for the whole time. So I'm
Yes.
looking at the numbers, and this is from a source that's completely unbiased and doesn't
Yes.
lean in any either
Right.
direction. It's just looking at
Right.
the numbers, and the
Sure.
death rate for each country is, for each state is pretty much
Mm.
similar. Florida's
Yes.
ranked with the 23rd highest death rate of the 50 states, and California's
Mhm.
25.
Yes. And
So
so, yeah, what that tells me is that the so-called science that they're depending on is fraudulent. It's not real.
mm,
Okay? A lot of things that they're pushing out there is just fraudulent. It's not real. And so I know that I spend a lot of time in Florida, and it was just the other day we had spring break, and the mainstream media was speaking about how there's going to be massive COVID outbreaks, and by the spring breakers, young millennials who had descended upon Florida in March once they realized that they could go and party, and to their chagrin, to this day, there's no reports of any deaths or any negative consequences of this, period in Florida. So it really makes you question, what is the purpose of David Burt's, locking people up or finding people for having house parties or even meeting at Camden or anywhere in Bermuda for that matter, under the guise that, people are being irresponsible. This very fascist Marxist mindset, like pointing and making you feel guilty for just being alive.
yeah,
But then when you look at Florida, you see that, you got thousands and thousands of young people, right, up and down South Beach to West Palm Beach, and there are no reports of any so-called deaths from COVID. Okay, so the science, it reveals that the science that they are speaking of is a media science. If you went into a country that had no media, COVID wouldn't exist.
yeah. I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Anybody watching, I believe COVID's real, but I believe that the truth about COVID is something that people in a position of power take and they bend it to whatever will they want. If they want the numbers to help them oppress people, they'll bend it that way. If they want the numbers to help them
Right.
achieve some other gain, they'll bend it in that direction. That's what
Well,
I believe.
let's put to rest any idea of conspiracy theories, right? And let's just talk, let's go right to the horse's mouth. On October 19th, 2019, at Johns Hopkins University, hosted by Johns Hopkins University Health Sciences, I believe, sponsored by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you had a scenario planning exercise called Event 201. I would encourage everyone who's listening to this video to go ahead and Google Event 201. And when you sit down and listen with your cold beer or your glass of wine, you and your boo-boos or whoever, just take a listen to the scenario plan of a coronavirus outbreak. All right, this was in October 2019, and the so-called coronavirus actually broke out of Wuhan, China in December 2019. But you know what is eerily accurate? The predictions of the scenario plan. Don't take my word for it. Listen to it, and you tell me how accurate that scenario planning exercise is in terms of how we are living today, right? And let me emphasize that this is an event that was sponsored by the great Bill Gates and his lovely wife, Melinda Gates, and their foundation that does so much great work around the world. And the World Economic Forum, whose president is Dr. Klaus Schwab, and the World Economic Forum, if I can remind you, this is where David Burt went in 2016-17 and returned with his fintech mandate that most people in Bermuda today are wondering, well, what is the purpose, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that is part of a much greater strategy that Mr. Schwab himself has termed the Great Reset. And the Great Reset basically it appears to be a globalist approach to Marxism and fascism, where you have big business in cahoots with governments and a few other big entities. And it's not about giving freedom to the population. It seems to be the population is under increasing global control. And so if you want to know what the agenda is, going right back to your first question, that's what it is. And that's who David Burt served. Okay? And so that is the problem that we're facing today, is that we are under the control and under the influence of persons whose interest is not Bermuda or Bermudians. And I dare say whose interests don't seem to be humanity. And so if you want to know, or let's debunk all the conspiracy theorists, just go to the horse's mouth, the person who's putting his money where his mouth is, Mr. Bill Gates, who sponsored Event 201. And that would explain to you exactly where we are at and what to expect going forward in the future. The Free Democratic Movement is an entity that represents an antidote, the antithesis to this overall centralized, globalized movement to reduce humanity to serfs and to take freedom and liberty and the spiritual birthright away from them. That's what we represent. And let me end by saying this to the same powers that be. I've got a little message for you. In this big scheme of things, right? In this battle right here, you lose. All right. And I'm just forecasting. Before you get ahead of yourself and think that you're winning, you actually lose this match. All right. Give thanks.
Mark, thank you so much for stopping by. It was great chatting with you, having this conversation.
Yes, brother.
And then, anybody listening, stop by the group on Facebook, People's Group. We are open to everybody, no matter what your political slant, no matter what your opinion is. You're for things, you're against it, you like the government, you hate them, it doesn't matter. Just come, have a great conversation. And, hey, look up the Free Democratic Movement if you're looking for a third option in the next election. And, check out Mr. Marc Bean.
The FDM is alive and well. Quality is more important than quantity. And we certainly would not be a third option at the next election. We would be in a position, by virtue of us being steadfast and consistent to our principles and our policies, people will be able to trust us, which is more important than anything today. That's the ultimate political currency, and that is trust that comes along from truth and honor. And as a result of that combination, we are confident that at the right time, we will be well positioned to assume governance in this country, but it's a governance that's meant to arrest the negative impact and the spiral that the country is within at this point.
Thank you so much, Mark. Everybody, have a good evening.
Bless.